You never really know someone until they betray you. I learned that the hard way when I found out about my wife Ashley's affair. For 7 years, I thought we had a solid marriage. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? I believed in us, or at least I believed in her. I'm Aaron, 30M, and Ashley, 28F, was my wife, or so I thought. We met through mutual friends, hit it off right away, and within a couple of years, we were married. She always seemed so supportive, especially when it came to my family. My parents adored her, and after they passed away, I assumed she'd help me navigate life without them. Turns out I was wrong about everything. The affair came to light by sheer accident. It was a typical Friday night, and Ashley had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she stepped out to get something. I wasn't the type to go through her things, but a notification popped up that I couldn't ignore. Rob's name appeared on her screen. Rob was the family trustee, the guy responsible for managing my parents' estate after they passed away a couple of years ago. We weren't exactly close, but he'd always been friendly, overly friendly in hindsight. That night, I found myself staring at the phone, my heart pounding in my chest as I unlocked it. There it was, the proof I hadn't even been looking for, but hit me like a ton of bricks. Ashley and Rob weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future together, complete with a romantic getaway she had been calling a girl's trip. As I scrolled through their messages, it became painfully clear that they had been plotting this for a long time. They weren't just sneaking around, they were planning to leave me, and worse, they were banking on the trust fund to support their new life together. Ashley assumed that divorcing me wouldn't affect her claim on my parents' estate. She thought she'd still get her share, that everything would fall neatly into place, and she could live off my parents' money while I faded into the background. What she didn't know was that my parents, bless them, had prepared for something like this. The trust was airtight. Ashley wouldn't see a penny after the divorce. I hadn't told her that yet. Maybe I hadn't wanted to believe things would get this bad, but now, it felt like the perfect card to play. I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding her phone in my hand, trying to process what I just read. 7 years of marriage, a life built together. And this is what it had all been for? Rob? My mind raced through every interaction, every moment of doubt I'd ignored over the past few months. The way Ashley had been more distant, the sudden work events that kept Rob busy late into the night. It was all so obvious now, but I hadn't wanted to see it. But what hit me hardest was how confident they were. Ashley had already booked her vacation with Rob, some luxury resort in the Bahamas. It was happening in just a few days. She was going to leave me, sleep with the family trustee, and come back thinking she'd still have a claim to the trust. Well, she was in for a rude awakening. I could feel my pulse slowing as a plan started forming in my head. When Ashley left for her trip, I'd make sure everything was ready. By the time she returned, she wouldn't be greeted with the cozy, wealthy lifestyle she'd envisioned. She'd be met with a lawsuit instead. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. She thought she could take everything from me, but little did she know, I still had control over my parents' trust. And Rob? Well, he wasn't as smart as he thought he was either. After discovering Ashley's betrayal, I spent the next few days in a state of shock, trying to wrap my head around everything. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I kept my cool, acted like nothing was wrong, and went through the motions of everyday life while I figured out my next move. Ashley had no idea that I knew about her affair, or that her little girl's trip was actually a romantic getaway with Rob. I watched her pack, chat on the phone with her so-called friends, and smile like her world was perfect. She had no idea what was coming. I realized I couldn't let my emotions control me. Blowing up on her would have only given her the upper hand. I needed to stay calm and be strategic. I spent hours going over the terms of my parents' trust, making sure everything was locked down as tightly as I thought it was. Thankfully, my parents had been cautious when setting up the estate. They never liked Ashley, and I guess they'd seen something in her that I'd been blind to. She wasn't getting a dime after the divorce. And Rob? Well, Rob wasn't as innocent as he appeared either. I started digging deeper into Rob's handling of the trust. Something had been gnawing at me for a while. Small discrepancies in the accounts, unexplained withdrawals, things that didn't add up. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. Rob had always seemed so competent, and I never thought to question him. But now, I realized he'd been siphoning money, slowly and quietly, hoping no one would notice. The more I looked, the angrier I became. Rob had betrayed not only my trust, but also my parents' legacy. He and Ashley were using my family's money to fund their future, thinking they were untouchable. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I knew I needed help. I couldn't take on both of them alone, especially not Rob, who had years of experience with estate management. That's when I decided to reach out to Sandra, Rob's wife. Sandra and I weren't close, but we'd crossed paths many times over the years. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman, and from what I'd heard, she ran her household with an iron fist. I wasn't sure how she would react, but I figured she deserved to know what Rob had been up to. Besides, if anyone could help me take him down, it was her. I scheduled a meeting with Sandra under the guise of discussing estate matters. When she arrived, I could see the curiosity in her eyes. She didn't suspect a thing. I wasted no time. "I need to tell you something," I said, as soon as we sat down. "It's about Rob and Ashley." Her face hardened. "What about them?" I took a deep breath and laid it all out. I told her about the affair, about the vacation they were planning, and about the money Rob had been stealing from the trust. I showed her the discrepancies in the accounts, the messages I'd found on Ashley's phone, and the reservations for their trip. At first, Sandra just sat there, her expression unreadable. But as the reality of the situation sank in, I saw her jaw tighten and her eyes narrow. She wasn't angry, she was furious. "That son of a b**********, she muttered under her breath, her voice cold and calculated. "He's been lying to me for years." Sandra didn't waste time wallowing in her feelings. She was just as determined as I was to take them down. She asked for copies of the evidence I had, and we agreed to work together to expose Rob and Ashley's deceit. But we weren't going to confront them outright. No, we were going to hit them where it hurt. We would wait until they were on their little vacation, blissfully unaware that their world was about to come crashing down. By the time they returned, they'd be greeted with more than just a messy divorce. They'd be hit with a lawsuit for embezzlement, fraud, and whatever else we could throw at them. I could already picture the look on Ashley's face when she realized she wouldn't be living the life of luxury she'd dreamed of. Instead, she and Rob would be scrambling to save themselves from the legal hell Sandra and I were about to unleash. For now, I just had to keep pretending that everything was fine. But inside, I was counting down the days until Ashley and Rob got exactly what they deserved. When I first reached out to Sandra, I was bracing for a hostile reaction. After all, I was about to tell her that her husband had not only been cheating on her, but was also stealing from my family's trust. But to my surprise, she didn't hang up. She listened in silence, and when I laid out the evidence, I heard a long, slow sigh on the other end of the line. "I had my suspicions," she said, her voice calm but cold. "Rob's been acting strange for months. He's been working late, taking trips without much explanation, and hiding his phone. I thought something was off, but I didn't think it was this." It turns out Sandra wasn't entirely shocked by Rob's betrayal, though the confirmation still stung. She'd already noticed his distance, but like me, she'd chalked it up to stress or work. The affair was a bombshell, but what really hit her hard was the embezzlement. Rob hadn't just been unfaithful, he was also stealing. That was unforgivable in her eyes. "I'll help you," she said after a long pause. "But we're not just going to catch them. We're going to destroy them." Sandra's no-nonsense approach was exactly what I needed. She wasn't interested in playing nice, and neither was I. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, away from prying eyes, and when we sat down together for the first time, I could see the determination in her eyes. She was out for blood. "You think they're still on this vacation, blissfully unaware?" Sandra asked, flipping through the records I had brought. "Yep," I replied. "They think they've pulled off the perfect crime. Rob's been skimming money from the trust, and Ashley's been covering for him. She still thinks she's entitled to part of the fund after the divorce, even though I cut her out months ago." Sandra shook her head, disgusted. "Rob's a fool. He should have known better than to mess with estate money. And Ashley? She's in for a rude awakening when she realizes she won't get a single penny." The more Sandra and I dug into the financials, the worse it got. Rob hadn't just been skimming. He had been funneling large sums of money into a secret offshore account. The trust was airtight, but that didn't stop him from taking small amounts here and there, hoping no one would notice. Ashley had been in on it, helping Rob divert funds, likely in preparation for their new life together. Sandra's access to Rob's personal records was a goldmine. She found hidden bank statements, suspicious transactions, and enough evidence to put Rob in serious legal trouble. We even uncovered emails between Rob and Ashley, discussing their plans to leave everything behind and live off what they had stolen. "Arrogant," Sandra muttered as she scanned an email exchange where Rob promised Ashley that they'd be set for life once everything was squared away. "They really think they're untouchable." We worked for hours, gathering every piece of evidence we could find. By the time we were done, we had a case strong enough to bring both of them down. Rob might have been good at covering his tracks, but Sandra knew him better than anyone, and she wasn't about to let him walk away with everything. By the time Ashley and Rob jetted off on their vacation, Sandra and I were ready to strike. They were probably drinking cocktails, laughing at how they had fooled everyone. But what they didn't know was that a legal storm was brewing back home. While they basked in the sun, Sandra and I were finalizing the details of the lawsuit. Rob would be charged with embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Ashley, too, wasn't off the hook. She had actively participated in the scheme, and she'd face her own set of legal consequences. The best part? They wouldn't see it coming. Rob and Ashley would return from their little getaway thinking they'd won, only to be greeted with legal papers that would turn their world upside down. Sandra looked at me as we finished filing the final documents. "When this is over, they won't have anything left," she said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. I nodded, feeling the weight of what we'd just set in motion. They took everything from us. Now it's time to take everything from them. As we parted ways that evening, I knew there was no going back. This wasn't just about the money or even the betrayal. This was about justice. Ashley and Rob had torn apart our lives, and now they were going to pay for it. The calm before the storm had passed. Now, it was time to unleash the fury. While Ashley and Rob were living it up on their luxury vacation in Europe, it was hard not to picture them basking in their fantasy world. I imagined them sipping champagne by the pool, taking selfies with stunning backdrops, and toasting to the new life they thought they were about to build together. It was almost laughable, knowing what awaited them once they returned. They believed they had everything figured out, freedom from their old lives, a trust fund to live off, and each other. The texts I had read between them revealed their excitement. Rob promised her a new life of wealth, far from the mess they were leaving behind. Little did they know, they were building that life on lies, embezzled money, and betrayal. While they were off enjoying lavish dinners and five-star resorts, Sandra and I were hard at work. We gathered evidence meticulously, digging into every suspicious transaction Rob had made. With her insider access to Rob's financials and my knowledge of the trust fund, we left no stone unturned. Sandra had access to Rob's private files at home and even managed to recover deleted emails and confidential documents from his computer. She found countless emails between Rob and Ashley, where they plotted their escape and discussed how much money they'd need to live comfortably abroad. Rob reassured Ashley that his work on the trust would cover everything. "Aaron won't even notice," he wrote in one particularly infuriating email. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. Rob hadn't just skimmed money from the trust fund. He had funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into secret offshore accounts, all under the guise of investment management. Ashley's name was on several of those transfers, which tied her directly to the crime. It was clear she hadn't just been a passive participant in the affair. She had been actively helping him defraud my family. Sandra, as calm as she seemed, had a fire burning inside her that matched my own. We didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. We wanted to expose their lies and make sure they were held accountable for every cent they had stolen, every betrayal they had committed. Sandra had been blindsided just like I had, and her determination to bring Rob down was unrelenting. Our lawyer was confident we had a solid case. "This is a textbook case of fraud and embezzlement," he told us, flipping through the stack of evidence we'd gathered. "There's no way they'll be able to fight this. We'll bury them in court." Meanwhile, Rob and Ashley were none the wiser. They posted pictures on social media, smiling at the Eiffel Tower, lounging on yachts, clinking glasses at rooftop bars. I imagined them celebrating what they thought was their grand escape, while Sandra and I were putting the final nails in their coffin. And while it was satisfying knowing what awaited them, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The betrayal still cut deep. I had loved Ashley, really loved her, and the thought of her scheming behind my back with Rob, the man who was supposed to protect my family's assets, filled me with a bitterness I didn't know I had. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the cold calculation behind it all. She'd used our marriage, my family's trust, and Rob's position for her own gain, never caring about the destruction she left in her wake. As the days of their vacation passed, I waited. Every time a new picture of them surfaced online, my resolve hardened. They might have thought they had won, but they were in for a rude awakening when they stepped off that plane. Because when they returned, their little paradise would come crashing down. They wouldn't be greeted by lavish homes or an endless supply of stolen money. No, they'd be greeted by a stack of legal papers. Papers that would start a fight they couldn't win. They would have to answer for everything. The affair, the embezzlement, the lies. And I was ready to watch it all unfold. As their vacation ticked on, so did the countdown to the day of reckoning. And it was coming fast. Ashley and Rob came back from their lavish European vacation, looking every bit like they had just stepped out of a travel magazine, tan, smiling, and blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. They walked through the airport, as if their lives were perfectly intact, believing they had outsmarted everyone. They had no idea that the fantasy world they built was about to come crashing down. The day after their return, Ashley called me, acting as if everything was normal, as if our marriage hadn't ended in the most twisted way possible. Her voice had that same fake sweetness I had grown to hate over the years. She wanted to talk, said she had some things to go over now that she was back, probably assuming we'd have a friendly conversation about dividing assets. Like the whole affair and betrayal were just water under the bridge. I agreed to meet, knowing full well what was coming next. Ashley showed up at our house, trying to put on her usual charm. She was dressed casually, like she hadn't just spent weeks parading around Europe with my family's trustee, the man who had stolen from me. There was something unsettling about how comfortable she was, as if she truly believed everything was going to work out in her favor. We sat in the living room, and for a while I let her talk. She rambled on about how complicated things had been between us, how we could sort through things like adults, and that she hoped I'd be reasonable with the divorce settlement. She even had the audacity to mention the trust fund, acting like she was still entitled to it. I bit my tongue, letting her dig her own grave. I could tell she was trying to test the waters, to see if I knew anything about her little fling with Rob. She mentioned him casually, like he was just another colleague, downplaying their connection. I listened quietly, letting her think she was still in control. When she finally stopped talking, I stood up, reached into my bag, and pulled out the lawsuit papers. "What's this?" she asked, her smile faltering. I handed them to her, and as she read through the documents, her face went pale. The shock that spread across her features was priceless. She blinked rapidly, as if her brain was struggling to process what was happening. "A lawsuit," she stammered, looking up at me with wide eyes. "That's right," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You didn't think you'd get away with everything, did you?" Ashley's hands trembled as she flipped through the papers, scanning the detailed charges. Embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. Every lie she and Rob had told, every cent they had stolen, was outlined in those pages. All her careful planning, all the manipulation had been exposed. You can't be serious," she finally managed to say, her voice cracking. "This is a mistake." "I didn't, Rob." She was struggling to find words, but there was no escape. "I'm very serious," I replied. "Rob's been siphoning money from my parents' trust for months, and you were helping him. You both thought you could live off that money, didn't you? Well, I've cut you out. Neither of you is getting a dime." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. "But the trust," she whispered, still in denial. "The trust is airtight," I said, cutting her off. "You're not entitled to anything, Ashley. My parents made sure of that. And now, you and Rob are going to face the consequences." She looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for her. She had destroyed our marriage, stolen from my family, and betrayed every ounce of trust one had ever given her. And now, she was going to pay for it. As she sat there, stunned, I added, "Oh, and just so you know, Sandra's involved too. She knows everything. We've been working together to make sure both of you face justice." The mention of Sandra sent her spiraling even further into panic. "Sandra? She knows?" "Everything," I confirmed. "And she's not going to let Rob walk away from this either. So you might want to brace yourself for what's coming next." Ashley's eyes were wide with fear and disbelief. She didn't say another word, just sat there holding the lawsuit papers like they were burning a hole in her hands. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. "We're done here, Ashley," I said as I left. "Good luck explaining this to Rob." As I walked out of the house, I felt lighter than I had in months. This was only the beginning, but I knew the tide had turned. Ashley and Rob had played their game, and now it was my turn. The lawsuit was just the first move. There was much more to come. Ashley's face drained of color as she skimmed through the lawsuit papers. Her confident demeanor crumbled in an instant. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking, her usual manipulative charm nowhere to be found. I watched her panic, my heart beating steadily, knowing there was no turning back now. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, maintaining my calm. "You and Rob have been caught. You thought you could waltz off into the sunset with his help and my family's money. But the trust? You're not getting a single penny. And now, you're facing legal action for embezzlement." She was visibly shaking, her hands trembling as she gripped the papers. I could see her mind racing, trying to calculate her next move, scrambling to figure out how to escape this. But this time, there was no way out. The lawsuit was airtight, and Ashley knew it. I didn't steal anything," she blurted out, her eyes wide and pleading. "It was all Rob. He told me it was fine. He said everything was legal. Her voice was climbing higher with every word, as if sheer volume could change the reality she was facing. I raised an eyebrow. Funny, you didn't seem so concerned about what was legal when you were booking first-class tickets to Europe with Rob, I said. You were in on it, Ashley. You were planning to live off money that wasn't yours, my family's money. And now you're going to pay for it. Her facade cracked further. Tears welled up in her eyes. But I knew better than to believe them. This wasn't sadness or remorse. It was pure fear. And she wasn't the only one feeling it. Rob was served the same day. Sandra, his now soon-to-be ex-wife, had been just as eager for this moment as I was. When Rob got the papers, he immediately tried to call her, no doubt thinking he could manipulate or sweet-talk his way out of the mess he'd created. But Sandra wasn't picking up. She had already filed for divorce and cut him off completely. From what I'd heard, Rob wasn't handling it well. The fantasy life he and Ashley had dreamed up together was crumbling around them. And for the first time, they were realizing the gravity of what they'd done. By the time Rob tried to reach out to me, I wasn't surprised. I let his call go straight to voicemail, of course. I didn't need to hear his excuses or attempts to justify what he'd done. As much as I despised him for his betrayal, I didn't have the energy to engage. The courts would handle it now, and Rob would get exactly what was coming to him. Ashley, however, wasn't ready to give up without a fight. Later that evening, she texted me, trying a different tactic. Her message was filled with desperate apologies, claiming she had been manipulated by Rob and that she never wanted it to end this way. But I wasn't buying it. I'd seen the real Ashley, the woman who had planned her escape with another man while leaving me to deal with the fallout. The tears, the apologies, the desperate attempts to wriggle out of the lawsuit. They were nothing more than last-ditch efforts to save herself. This was a mess of their own making, and now they had to face the consequences. Sandra and I had built an unshakable case, and the evidence was damning. Between Rob's embezzlement from the trust and Ashley's involvement, there was no way they could talk their way out of this. The following days were a whirlwind of legal meetings, depositions, and media attention. As much as I wanted to retreat and avoid the spotlight, the lawsuit had drawn too much interest. Rob had been the trustee for multiple wealthy families, and when the news of his embezzlement hit, it was a feeding frenzy. His reputation was ruined, his career as a trustee destroyed overnight. And Ashley? Well, she was left standing in the wreckage of the life she thought she was going to live. Through it all, Sandra and I remained focused. We weren't doing this for revenge, although I'd be lying if I said watching Ashley's world collapse didn't bring a certain satisfaction. We were doing this because it was the right thing to do. Rob and Ashley had manipulated, stolen, and lied for months. They deserved everything that was coming to them. As the court date approached, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. The chaos, the lies, the betrayal. It was all finally coming to an end. And I knew, no matter what happened next, I was free from them. Ashley and Rob were about to face the reality they had been so desperately avoiding, and there was no escaping it now. The fallout from the lawsuit hit harder and faster than even I expected. Rob's career was done. His embezzlement was front-page news, and with each passing day, more details of the affair and their betrayal came to light. It wasn't just the stolen funds or the affair. It was the audacity of thinking they'd get away with it. The media had a field day with the story. Astra's trust fund heir sues cheating wife and family trustee in embezzlement scandal star. Ashley, of course, tried to save face. I woke up one morning to see a string of texts from her. She was begging for forgiveness, saying she never meant for things to get so out of control. The messages started off apologetic, claiming she was manipulated by Rob, that she was confused, scared, blah, blah, blah. But as I scrolled, her tone shifted. Desperation crept in, and her pleas became less about apologies and more about what she had lost. Aaron, please. I made a mistake. You have to understand. I thought Rob had everything figured out. I didn't know things would get this bad. Please, I have nothing now. You can't just leave me like this. Leave her like this? That was rich, considering she had left me emotionally long before the divorce papers were even drawn up. She had planned a whole life behind my back with another man, stealing from my family's legacy, thinking she'd just waltz away in a luxury without consequences. Rob, on the other hand, was facing even more fallout. The full extent of his theft was becoming clearer as investigators dug through the accounts. It wasn't just my parents' trust. Rob had been siphoning money from other families he was managing, and his name was mud in financial circles. Every major client had dropped him, and now Rob and Ashley were scrambling, not for some beachfront property in Europe, but for ways to stay out of prison. It was satisfying to watch them unravel. For once, I wasn't the one left scrambling or trying to pick up the pieces. They were, and no matter how many times Ashley tried to reach out, I was done. She had chosen her path, and now she was facing the consequences. A week after the lawsuit went public, I got a call from Sandra. She had just finalized her divorce from Rob, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I'm free," she said simply. "I can finally move on from all of this." I congratulated her. Sandra had been through her own hell with Rob, and now that he was facing criminal charges, she was ready to put it all behind her. She mentioned how Rob had tried to weasel his way out of things by offering to make a deal with the court, but the evidence was so strong, the judge wasn't interested in any of his excuses. Rob was facing years in prison, and with the amount of money he had stolen, there was no escaping it. Meanwhile, Ashley? She wasn't getting a free pass either. With her role in helping Rob cover up the embezzlement, she was implicated in the crime too. Her defense was weak, claiming ignorance, saying Rob had tricked her into it. But the evidence showed otherwise. Bank transfers, messages, and emails all pointed to her active involvement. And while her role wasn't as deep as Rob's, she wasn't going to walk away scot-free. Watching her world fall apart was a strange experience. Part of me thought I'd feel more satisfaction, more closure, seeing the people who had hurt me so deeply face the consequences. And while I did feel a certain vindication, it wasn't the revenge that brought me peace. It was the fact that I could finally close that chapter of my life. With Ashley and Rob out of the picture, I could finally move forward. The trust fund, once tainted by their deceit, was now protected and secure again. But more importantly, I felt secure again. Free from the lies, free from the manipulation, free from the betrayal that had poisoned my life for so long. As for Ashley, I wasn't sure what she'd do next, and frankly, I didn't care. She was facing a future she never saw coming. A future without me, without the trust fund, without her luxury vacations and champagne dreams. She had gambled everything on a fantasy, and now she was paying the price. Sandra had always been sharp, far sharper than Rob ever gave her credit for. When the affair and embezzlement came to light, she wasted no time. While Rob and Ashley were on their little vacation, she was already working with her lawyer, preparing for a divorce that would leave Rob with almost nothing. Rob had built his entire reputation on trust and discretion, traits that were now shattered beyond repair. But Sandra wasn't just after a clean break. She wanted to make sure Rob felt the full weight of his betrayal. For years, she had supported him, believing in his integrity, all while he siphoned funds from clients and cheated with my wife behind her back. She had no intention of playing nice. By the time Rob and Ashley were served with the lawsuit, Sandra had already filed for divorce, freezing every joint account she and Rob shared. She was smart. She knew exactly how to protect herself from Rob's financial disaster. Sandra wasn't about to let him drag her down with him. I remember the day she called me after the divorce proceedings. "I got him," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and satisfaction. "I got everything I was owed, and then some." Sandra had not only secured her share of their assets, but she also made sure Rob would be left with nothing more than his debts and the looming legal battle he faced. "He never saw it coming," she added. "Thought I'd sit back and play the helpless wife. Guess I'm full of surprises." Her revenge didn't stop at the divorce. Sandra had been instrumental in uncovering the full extent of Rob's embezzlement. She worked closely with the forensic accountants we hired, providing documents, emails, and even recorded conversations she'd had with Rob over the years, unknowingly catching him discussing shady financial moves. Every bit of evidence she provided helped us build an ironclad case against him and Ashley. Sandra wasn't motivated by money. She already had enough to live comfortably on her own. No, this was personal. She wanted to make sure Rob faced the consequences, not just for betraying her, but for betraying the trust of everyone he'd conned. And she wasn't about to let Ashley get off lightly either. "You know," Sandra said to me one evening over drinks, "Ashley really thought she'd end up living the high life with Rob. I almost feel bad for her. Almost." We both knew that Ashley had placed her bets on the wrong man. Rob had promised her a life of luxury, but all he could offer now was a future full of court dates and fines. Sandra reveled in the fact that not only had she taken Rob for everything he was worth, but she'd also played a key role in dismantling the fantasy world he and Ashley had tried to build. In the end, Rob and Ashley were both facing a reality they never saw coming. The lavish vacations, the secret accounts, the grand future they had planned, all of it was gone. Sandra had hit them where it hurt the most. I used to feel sorry for Rob, Sandra confessed one night, swirling her wine glass thoughtfully. Now, I just feel sorry for anyone dumb enough to believe a word he says. It was hard not to admire Sandra's resilience. She had been wronged just as much as I had, but instead of letting it break her, she channeled her anger into action. And with her help, we had not only exposed the full scope of Rob's crimes, but ensured that neither he nor Ashley would ever fully recover. Sandra's revenge was a masterclass in taking control of a situation that could have destroyed her. She emerged victorious, not just financially, but emotionally as well. And as for Rob and Ashley, they were about to realize that no amount of scheming could ever save them from the mess they had created. Ashley's downfall was swift and brutal, unfolding in ways that even I didn't anticipate. She went from envisioning a life of luxury with Rob to watching everything she had meticulously schemed for fall apart before her eyes. The first blow came when the lawsuit was filed. Ashley, still delusional about her entitlement to my parents' trust fund, showed up to her lawyer's office confident she could contest the will. But that confidence quickly evaporated when she was hit with the reality of the airtight conditions my parents had set. The trust was ironclad, and she wasn't entitled to a single penny, no matter how many legal maneuvers she attempted. Still, that was just the beginning. Rob's downfall came crashing down on her as well. The evidence Sandra and I had gathered, emails, financial records, and the forensic accounting reports, painted a clear picture of their roles in the embezzlement scheme. Ashley hadn't just been a bystander. She had actively participated in covering up the money trail. When it became clear that Rob's shady dealings couldn't be explained away, Ashley found herself in the crosshairs of the investigation. She went from trying to live a carefree life to being summoned to court, facing charges that would strip her of any freedom she thought she had. The media, of course, latched onto the scandal. Headlines splashed across news outlets, focusing on the betrayal, the affair, and the financial crime at the heart of it all. Ashley, who once relished being the center of attention for all the wrong reasons, was now watching her reputation disintegrate in real time. Everywhere she turned, doors were closing. Her friends? Gone. The people she once bragged to about her new life with Rob stopped returning her calls. She couldn't even go out without being recognized. And instead of envy or admiration, she was met with whispers of disdain and judgment. Then came the financial collapse. Without access to the trust fund, and with Rob's assets frozen in preparation for the lawsuits, Ashley had nothing. The luxurious apartment they'd rented, the high-end vacations, they were all paid for with the money Rob had stolen. With everything locked down, she couldn't even access the basics. The money she thought would always be there vanished like sand through her fingers. Rob, of course, didn't stick around. When the pressure mounted, he did what any coward would do. He distanced himself. He began blaming Ashley for their problems, acting like she was the mastermind of it all. The reality was, they were both guilty, but Rob was more than happy to throw her under the bus to save himself. He filed for a quick separation, trying to salvage what little he could from the wreckage. Ashley had always assumed she could rely on her charm, her looks, and her manipulative nature to get what she wanted. But when the legal system came for her, none of that mattered. She was reduced to a scared, isolated woman with no one left in her corner. The legal battles drained what little resources she had left, and soon enough, she was struggling to keep up with basic living expenses. One of the last times I saw her, she looked nothing like the woman I had married. Gone was the polished, confident Ashley who used to command attention in every room. In her place was someone broken by the weight of her own greed and deceit. She tried to talk to me, tried to play the victim, claiming she'd been misled by Rob, that she didn't know how deep she was in. But I saw through her. This was just another attempt to manipulate her way out of trouble. I gave her nothing. No sympathy, no pity. She had dug this hole herself, and now she would have to live in it. By the time the embezzlement trial wrapped up, Ashley's world had completely crumbled. The court ruled in favor of the trust, and both she and Rob were sentenced. Rob, having committed the majority of the crimes, faced a harsher penalty. But Ashley didn't escape unscathed. She was hit with a string of financial penalties that ensured she wouldn't bounce back anytime soon. And with her involvement in Rob's schemes well documented, she was looking at several years of legal battles and potentially time behind bars. In the end, Ashley was left with nothing but the remnants of a life she had selfishly tried to build on lies and betrayal. Rob was gone, her future was in shambles, and I was finally free of her toxic hold. It was poetic justice in the most satisfying way. Ashley's plan had been to live a life of wealth and luxury, but instead, she was left with a life of regret and isolation. It's been a few months since the dust finally settled, and I can honestly say, for the first time in years, I feel free. The whole ordeal with Ashley and Rob could have broken me, but instead, it became the wake-up call I needed. They thought they could strip me of everything, my parents' trust, my dignity, but all they did was expose their own greed and make me realize just how much better off I am without them. After the court cases wrapped up and the media frenzy died down, I took some time for myself. It wasn't just about healing from the betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life. I started spending more time doing things I'd put on hold while dealing with the disaster that was my marriage. I reconnected with old friends, traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, and poured myself into new projects at work. It was strange how everything felt clearer without the weight of Ashley's lies hanging over me. Sandra and I still keep in touch. She's found her own path to recovery after divorcing Rob, and there's a shared sense of relief between us that we didn't let those two get away with their scheme. Sandra has this strength about her that I've come to admire. We've bonded over everything we went through, and while our connection was born out of betrayal, there's a genuine friendship there now. As for Ashley, the last I heard, she's still tangled up in legal battles. She's completely disappeared from the social circles she used to flaunt herself in. Her attempts to rebuild her life have been slow and, from what I've gathered, full of roadblocks. I don't wish her well, but I don't spend my time hoping she suffers either. In the end, she created her own misery. I've learned that the best revenge isn't about watching someone fall. It's about standing tall while they scramble to recover. Rob? He got what he deserved. His reputation is destroyed, and his career is over. There's some poetic justice in knowing that the man who thought he could play me and steal from my family now has nothing to his name. He and Ashley might have envisioned a future of wealth and luxury, but now they're facing the harsh reality of their choices. What I've gained, though, is more valuable than any trust fund. I've gained clarity. I've gained self-respect. I may have lost a wife, but I gained a sense of peace I didn't know I was missing. For so long, I had been caught up in trying to make my marriage work, in trying to keep things together, that I hadn't realized how much of myself I was losing in the process. Now I'm moving forward with my life, focusing on the things and people that truly matter. I've come to realize that sometimes, losing something you thought you couldn't live without is exactly what you need to grow. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I'm ready for it, whatever it may be. I survived the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the lies, but more importantly, I came out of it stronger. And that's something no one, especially not Ashley or Rob, can ever take from me.